All right, guys. Hey, it's Jonathan Edwards here. Welcome to another video or an audio, depending on where you are. But listen, a disclaimer, as always, I work with aspiring athletes and their families. These are families who've got big athletic dreams and they're really go for it. My advice is geared towards them. So with that in mind, some of that advice may not rub you the right way if you are not as into it or committed. If you aren't willing to take 100% responsibility for your athletic experience, if you're going to blame coaches, blame the weather, blame something other than yourself, it probably isn't the advice for you. So if you're going to hang out, that's fine. Leave appropriate comments where necessary. But again, just a little disclaimer, this advice isn't for everybody. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Let's get started. So the third question for today might be the first one you're hearing if you're listening to me on Apple Podcasts. But the idea here is we're going to talk about common misunderstandings about the college recruiting process for athletes. Okay. This is a really good one. So, I've had the chance now, this is pretty fascinating. So like I was a high school American and I was an Olympian in a completely different sport, but I was a high school American. I was a Division I recruit. And what that means was I got recruited by Division I schools. I also got recruited by Division II, Division III. Ultimately, I never went to college. And that may surprise a lot of people because for me at that time, because of my Olympic experience, I had traveled a lot of the world. I had been away from home for a really long time. I had met a lot of really successful people. And while I was interested in school, the recruiting experiences that I had weren't great, meaning they didn't like blow my socks off and go like, oh my God, I want to go here. I probably would have ended up in Notre Dame. But at the time for me, like Notre Dame came off as being like very Catholic and I was very not at the time. But there were other things about it, like just the living experience. Like it seemed like I was with a bunch of kids. It felt like I was going backwards. And so I didn't ultimately go. But the whole concept like of getting recruited back then still is true. The concepts are still true today. And as I work with athletes each year, people think there's some new thing to do. And there's always recruiting services popping up and places that tell you like, oh, we'll take that video of your athlete and then we'll put it together and then we'll send it to coaches and then coaches will call you. That is something to just not fall for. All right. That is just not something to buy into, because the idea is that yes, there is money to be found for college athletes, right? And there's billions of dollars actually goes to athletes going to universities to play sports, and that could be a pretty intriguing number. And so when people think like, people will downplay is not the right word, but parents who think like, hey, my kid is, my athlete shows promise and, why wouldn't we try to go for a scholarship and get some academic money as well? And I'm like, yeah, let's do it, because everybody else is going to go like, oh, the odds are small, only 2%, blah, blah, blah. That's not true. Like I've known athletes who were not like the best on their school's team, on their university team, yet the coach still found something to give them, right? And now, so we have scholarship money, as there's academic money, there's athletic money, but there's also money based on need. Schools now, we are in a very interesting time where universities are getting ridiculously expensive, right? So especially in the United States. So you've got the U.S. government that allows basically students to get a lot of money, like a lot of student loans, and the schools then have increased tuition by a lot, right? More than people would say like the value of the degree is for many things, unless you're like a doctor or lawyer, things like that. But the idea is that so you can take on all this debt, get a degree that without any guidance, by the way, get a degree that does not turn into a paycheck that allows you to outpace the money you borrowed. And if you go bankrupt, if you have to file personal bankruptcy at some point, you can't put the student loan debt in the bankruptcy. So you're stuck with that, right? So that's an important decision. And what happens to a lot of athletes? Okay, so like I worked with an athlete a number of years ago, and this athlete was playing a sport at a major medical school in the United States, right? This is a world-class medical school, and he wanted to be a doctor. And the coach of the sport that he played said, "Hey, man, this is great. Yeah, we'll have you, and then yeah, you can go for that medical degree. That's fantastic. This is cool beans, man. Yeah, it's gonna be awesome. You're gonna love it here." When he gets on campus, then what does the coach tell him? You know what? You're not gonna have time to do that degree. And he was like, "What do you mean?" Once you're like a full-time D1 athlete, you'll just realize that you just don't have the time. So why don't you pick something a little less busy? And that's, to a kid who had the dream to be a Division I athlete and then also was like, I have the dream to be a doctor. Now that the athlete thing, there's a balance here, right? And the athlete's there on an athletic scholarship, so he can't really just kind of push that away. But now he can't do the degree that he wanted. And so what does he do? He takes something, and I can't remember what he took, but it wasn't, let's put it this way, it wasn't great. And he ended up graduating with a degree that didn't does not put him in a career path that's going to pay down he got a half ride. So the other half of the tuition, which is a lot of money, right? So you got to think of those things. So what I want, and that's important as you go into these things, right? But what I want to cover is this idea is that you want to realize that this recruiting process is about finding a school that fits your athlete. Okay. And I should say this, let's take the athlete aside. We should finding a school that fits your kid. That's the first thing, because what happens is that some coaches find out later that they missed out on an athlete who really wanted to go to their school, right? Like, let's say, the athlete goes to another school, and then they play the original school they wanted to go to, and they end up telling that coach, "Hey, you know what? I really wanted to come to your school." And the coach is like, goes back through their files and goes, "I never knew you wanted to come." Why? Because that athlete was just sitting back waiting to get seen, and maybe they got a couple letters and whatever, and they answered them, and they thought, "Hey, this is great." And then what happens? Well, they realize, if they had just reached out, that coach would have gone like, "Yeah, I would love to have you. Like, you fit our program. You want to be at our school. This is fantastic. Let's do it." Right. So that's really, really important to understand. So what needs to understand is that what you need to understand is there are a lot of athletes that just fall through the cracks, not because the cracks were like there to fall through. It's because they just didn't like step over them or attempt to step over any of them. And that's important to understand. Okay. So a couple things that make athletes that screw people up is athletes think that they are, they base themselves on their school, and they go like, wow, I'm or on their travel team or whatever. And they go like, I'm the best kid on my team. And they think, wow, I'm fantastic. Then I'm going to get recruited. That's not true. That's a myth. Right. And I call that cream of the crop syndrome. So it's like when I was competing in the sport of luge, trying to go to the Olympics, one of the best bits of advice I got from an Italian athlete was like, he's like, don't try to be the best in the United States. Look to us and be the best in the world. Because when you be the best in the world, when you look to us, being the best in the United States will take care of itself. And it did. But had we not gotten that advice, and we had just kind of, and this is what happens to a lot of athletes, they get stuck in their local soap opera, right? They get, and they go, well, oh, I'm faster than her, or I get more points than he does, or whatever. And they think like, oh, then I'll be, coaches are going to be coming at me. That's not true, right? You have to test yourself against the best first locally, then regionally, then nationally, then internationally, if that's your sport, right? If your sport's an international one, but then from there, you also have to be reaching out to coaches, right? So I tell people that this, getting recruited is the first big networking job and sales job you'll ever do in your life. Okay, so that really makes sense. So another thing that happens is that athletes they'll go to the ID camp. Like, so a lot of coaches will run camps at their school, right? So they'll say, so an athlete will reach out to a coach finally and say, "Hey coach, I'm interested in playing at your school." And the coach will send a letter back or have their assistant send a letter back and say, "Hey, love that you're interested in our school. Why don't you come to our camp? It's in August, $600. Come stay on campus for 2 nights, whatever." And then the coaches use that as a guise, like as a ruse to kind of invite you in. You pay for basically their recruiting of you, and they get to see you. Now, if you're good and you want to go to their school, it's a good deal, right? And it's a great way to get in front of that coach and get to talk to them and know them and joke with them, and they can learn about you, and that's cool. But for many athletes, that's not the case, right? So they go to the ID camp and they think like, oh, they must want me because they brought their athlete, like they sent me a letter and we sent a check and I'm here and here we go and I got the t-shirt and all this stuff and they must really want me. No, no, no. You still need to do all of the things necessary to impress that coach, and both athletically and then also reach out and tell them that you want to be there, right? It's really, really important. Okay. So more kids that go to their camps, the more money they make. And that helps fund their marketing for their advertising budget to be able to recruit more athletes. So to put it really negatively, they're using your dollars. If you're not able to go to their school, like let's say you're not good enough, but you go to their ID camp, that coach is basically using your money to recruit another kid to their school. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. Okay, but the coaches do use these camps, like they're not. This is what's hard about this process is these camps are not illegitimate activities, right? They are finding athletes through these camps, but you just have to be mindful of like, are you good enough or are you the cream of the crop? That sort of thing. One thing that happens to a lot of athletes is they get busy, right? So a lot of high school athletes, a lot of Olympians, we have Olympic level athletes in sports like, let's say, swimming or skiing or soccer. There's a lot of sports that are in the Olympics, and there's a lot of sport, and there are also collegiate sports. There are also NCAA sports or NAIA sports. There's Olympic sports like luge and bobsled and figure skating where there's no college program for that. Okay, but the idea is that athletes can get busy, and although athletes waste a lot of time, right? Athletes really truly waste a lot of time. And what happens there is that they it's recovery, right? They trained, they have lunch, but they're all caught up on their For You page on TikTok, right? So they waste a lot of time. So what the athlete needs to be doing in those moments is, and this is easier now than any. Like when I was young, I was sending mail with like a stamp, like right, like a real stamp. But for your athlete now, it's an email. Now, so what a lot of parents do is like, well, oh, my athlete's super busy, I'll reach out to the coaches. And that is like it's one of the biggest mistakes you can do, right? So a parent who writes a coach and says, "Hey, dear coach, I'm Mrs. So-and-so. My son/daughter really wants to go to your school, yada, yada." Don't do that. Don't do that. Now, what you can do is you can help your athlete by maybe proofreading an email, things along those lines. And so unfortunately, the optics when a parent sends an email on behalf for the athlete, like, is that it kind of shows whether this is true or not. It shows that the parent is more interested in the athlete getting recruited than the athlete does, right? So, and again, that's just the optics of it, but it's important. Okay. The other thing is that the coach can think that the athlete is just kind of like a bum, like just not really into it, lazy. Not not taking charge of their future, right? Now, this is different than advocating for an athlete. Like, so that's a different topic. But the idea is we want your athlete to kind of just reach out and go, no, hey, listen, I've thought about this and I want to be here. And again, the other side of it, the more negative view of it, is that a parent can be just kind of lurking in the background all the time, and coaches are scared by that now. Like there's parents that have ruined that. They have ruined that aspect of sport for them. Like we all know stories of the crazy parent, right? But the truth is they're out there, and it can end up looking like it's you, right? So we don't want that. Okay. So I want you to understand that the recruiting process is one where we want your athlete to take the lead, right? It's not even the best athletes. Like I've had the chance to work with some phenomenal athletes, like top of their class, like Division I schools are their safeties, right? And even though those athletes, sometimes they're the worst because they've been on every travel team, they've been on every All-Star game, and they've been asked to go to every, Under Armour this and All-American that. And then what ends up happening is they're just waiting, right? And they're just waiting for somebody to click on their profile and go, yeah, we want you, man. When in reality, they need to just go, hey, I want to be at your school. And now the coach goes, great. Now do you tick all the other boxes? Right? Do you tick all the other boxes? How do we do that? Let's go from there. Okay. So I hope that helps, right? This was not meant to be totally inclusive. I'm going to do more of these posts on recruiting if that's something that interests you. But by all means, if you got any questions, you can email me, Coach Edwards at athletespecific.com. And by all means, wherever you're watching this, leave a comment. Please like the video if you do, subscribe if you haven't, and yeah, we'll see you in the next video. All right, guys. Cheers. Bye.